very interesting. A lot of material there. The floor is open for discussion. Anybody want to just jump in?
Can I just simply add the simple question, especially from the first presenter that talking about the objectivity. I'm not quite sure. I mean, as far as I see from the slides, it went very quickly, but it seemed to me that you're talking about ontological foundation of the political economy that aim to be objective. Is that correct, or I misunderstood about that?
It's a bit different. The very idea is more radical. The very idea is that there is a struggle as such on what is to be perceived as objective or not to be objective. Yeah, and we as researchers, we as embedded within science, are part of this very struggle. Yeah, so we're not saying so everything we accept. Yeah, or let it be a little bit down. Yeah, whether we accept we have to raise key interest rates for central banks in order to fight inflation currently. Yeah. Some are saying yes, definitely, and central banks saying yes, we have to raise interest rates, and the mainstream economists say yes, we do have to raise interest rates if there's inflation. Yeah, but you can convincingly and plausibly argue that this is well, the raising key interest rates does not fight the current inflation because it's a different way of inflation. Yeah, so what we are saying is policy, the entire policy field, science, academics. It's all about struggles to define what is to be seen as objective or not. And this is what we do actually, what we try to contribute with our book, yeah, to this discussion. And of course, we are contributing our form of objectivity to the problems. But I guess that Christoph or Anna would like to say something to that as well.
May I add? I was going to ask for, adding something to what Joscha just said. The very idea of a consensus built around some of the ideas. The idea of interest rates to combat inflation is one. The consensus around growth is one very, very, within our mental subjectivities of, development and growth being something that we have to reach. We have to go there. We have to arrive there. So we have to catch up because we are behind everyone. So these kinds of consensus that are not questioned, in most of the fields where we work, how people think, in the media, in the everyday life of, the poorest people, the idea to, that you are rich when you consume a lot, you are behind everyone if you don't consume as much. These consensus built around some of the ideas that we have to question. So this objectivity is actually hiding a consensus behind it around many of the issues in political economy and public policies.
Thank you. Additional questions? Hello? I have one. It's a rather simple question. Why does one have, why is political economy outside of economics? You have to go outside of economics, basically, to learn about political economy.
Well, the reason is that economics have narrowed their field to a degree that basically just one approach is being used, and that is the approach based on the maximizing individual, maximizing its utilities. So they are starting out from a society that is composed by individuals, and it is only the individuals, in a way, that make the society. There is not the society by itself. And this major limitation, I believe, cuts out the issue then of how actually the many different fields of human behavior are governed by power relations, by habits, by all kinds of other factors than any kind of rational calculus of making the best out of what is there. So and it also comes with very narrow idea of how to find out what is out there. They are limited to a narrow positivism, where they believe that one can only make claims about what is clearly visible, and that there is no structure beyond the visibility. Of course, when one looks into their own field, one can easily say that if individuals are only behaving according to their rational calculus, that is a structure in itself. But they cannot explain how this structure comes about. So for that reason, I would say one really needs to move out of that field and enhance it with the insights of other social science theories and empirical findings.
Thank you. Further questions? Anybody just jump in? Nikolai.
So maybe two questions. One, so is there, could you say your definition of political economy in one sentence? Is that possible? You have this wonderful slide of the 3 over crossing kind of fields, but is there like a one sentence summary? That would be the one question. And the other question is, I was wondering, is there any use or possibility of joining certain public policy theoretical models with some of political economy, let's say something like the advocacy coalition framework or something like that, and kind of join that with some of the political economy theories that you mentioned. I mean, you showed like 20 or so, but is there like, how would you go about this, or should you even do this? Or I mean, that kind of links to the question of, maybe the bigger question, like, why should you even do that? Or why should you link those areas, which you already addressed to some extent, but I try to focus a bit more on this question.
Maybe I start, and then Anna and
Christoph,
you jump in.
Yes.
I consciously avoided to write one sentence of definition of a political economy approach to policy studies, because this is what we're actually showing. We're showing a pluralism in our book, and very different ontologies actually, but these ontologies agree on that there are very different views on public policy and a political economy approach to public policy. Yeah? So one definition would actually limit that pluralism. Yeah, that's so. Take it the other way around. If you pretend to pursue natural science, as neoclassical economics does, or economics in general, mainstream does, yeah, and you're neglecting that you're actually doing social science, yeah, then it's very easy to have one clear definition. Yeah? What we're actually seeing, and in my team, half my team are people that studied economics, yeah, and when we look at the empirical evidence, it's super shallow, yeah. They're producing models which actually are very often far from reality. So coming back to our books, so what we try to bring in is a very rich empirical evidence, and we are working with very, very different theories. So actually, in my view, it is impossible to have one definition of a critical political economy approach to public policy. And the question of whether it's possible to have a critical political economy fusion with public choice approach, if I understood you right, the very problem is that, let's say, current public choice, but maybe please help me with that, but my view or my idea of public choice is that it's actually very positivist, and it has a monoism approach, which is saying there's actually one theory able to explaining all the different things happening. And this is, so on the ontological level, it's actually not it's possible to bring these different theories together. But maybe I'm too harsh to public policy. So please help me with that, Anna and Christoph.
Don't think the public choice people
Public choice, sorry.
curiously sometimes use the word political economy, which can be confusing. We had a discussion about this, Christoph and I, when we organized this book, because it means the term is used in two different ways. In the mainstream economics, there is a kind of strand, I think. It's the public choice, rational choice, often referred to political economy, which can confuse people. Maybe there's nothing to add about that. It's not really political. But do you follow me? Joscha?
I would, but yeah, maybe Christoph and Anna, you join the debate.
I think it is political, public choice, because it's very normative, starting with the individual and maximizing utility there. To the question of learning from public policy, which is not necessarily public choice, I think the book is full of that. In my short presentation, I've shown that some chapters are using the discourse theory, are making use of Bob Jessop's concept of imaginaries and so on. I think there is a lot of fruitful cooperation. I'd like to hand over to Anna.
Just adding to what you just said, I think that social reality pressures theory a lot. When we have this whole phenomenon of a sense of the far right after Brexit and Trump, this has really destabilized a lot of, the traditional thinking in many of the fields. So public choice, and also even the, harsh orthodox economics, they had to look at society, they had to think about how culture influences, how religion influences these choices. And I think that what we see is when reality pressures theory, there is a change in there. So I think that there are some heterodox fields to think about the rational choice and public choices like this, but there are not many, so we have to pressure to do this.
I thought that Nikolai raised an interesting question about the theories of public policy and the advocacy coalition framework. I think that's easy to answer in one way, because the coalitions are pushing different views of political economy. It's a clash over political economy. Sabatier doesn't use this language, but that's, I think, how we would understand that from a political economy perspective. Other questions? Yeah. No? Hello? Anybody want to jump in here? No?
Maybe any specific message from the book that gonna help us understand better about the relationship between the global north and the global south? I mean, you mentioned a lot about this. You mentioned a little bit about it, but I want to know more any specific message that the book can tell the political economy in general can tell about that?
Well, political economy can tell a lot about the North-South gap because it is very much aware of power relations. That it is aware of the legacy of institutional settings in setting up the division of labor around the world. Colonialism was key to that and left a long legacy. These are aspects that are mentioned, and of course the discourse about what is good life, what is the right way to live, and so on. Who has then the power or the ability over time to develop these kind of concepts in a way that other people are buying into it? We would call that these ideas become hegemonic. And political economy can help in trying to understand these processes of how specific ideas become hegemonic. Anna has already mentioned developmentalism there, that one needs to catch up and one has to follow what has been done by the powerful nations before. And here, a critical political economy approach will show how this idea came about, how it became institutionalized, and what kind of a material force emanates from this kind of an idea, and to what degree then one can perhaps also destabilize it, can show that it is not the only way of organizing life, and that it is actually quite a destructive way. So I believe, especially for the issue of global inequality, critical political economy has lots to contribute.
Thank you.
I would add to Christoph by saying that the book addresses actually two things. One is the extension of the research agenda. When you talk about land, when you talk about mega projects, when you talk about deregulation in infrastructure, we do talk about issues that are so costly for the Global South, but these issues also touch the Global North strongly today. And what we do, besides expanding the agenda, is also to even question the division of Global South and North. For instance, when you talk about the care in global value chains, we're talking about a connection between South and North in terms of who are the subjects to deliver this care services, which are women from the South and from the North in some of the global value chains within the North. When you talk about environmental transition and just transition, and you talk about tax, we are actually talking about both South and North, so really not like making a strong division in there. So I think that the book is able to do this, to extend the agenda to the issues that are very costly for the Global South, but also to make the bridges between North and South. What I think that we did not do, and this is something that, of course, can be criticized and we have to improve, when you talk about theory and methods, we don't bring many issues from the Global South. Like we talk about these theoretical issues as they are global issues. But actually, this is something that is not, something that we do alone. It's very typical. There are many theorizations. There are many methodological contributions from Global South intellectuals that we could, try to bring in, but not to say that they are actually present in the other chapters. So when Luciana Giotto, a chapter that Christoph just presented, she really does a very strong critiques of trade and investment agreements. She does this out of the experience of Latin American countries with these 25 years of these free trade and investment agreements. So we do this out of the experience of the Global South. When you talk about mega projects in infrastructure, this comes out of the experiences, and these contributions, they bring in some new theoretical approaches and also methodological approaches. So I think that we are, in the book, we try to, touch all these issues and bring them up.
Another question?
If I may again, let me know, Frank,
Yeah.
if.
Go ahead.
Okay. I really like this overview that you gave of these many different political economy theories. I think that's really neat and useful. I was wondering, could something like that actually be done for the public policy theories? Have you done this, and could it be done, or would it be much more boring? So I'm somebody that comes from political economy. Increasingly, I've always worked on public policy, but not per se as a public policy scholar. So but now I'm getting more into this, and it seems much more restricted just in the amount of big kind of models that exist. So I'm just wondering, did you try this, or is my intuition or maybe my perception flawed? That's maybe the first question. And the second, I was just generally interested, how did you, what was your motivation to go upon this project? What did you feel like? Why did you feel you had to write this book, and you had to do this edited book volume? What did you feel was kind of missing, or which big gap would you kind of try to hit here? I was just wondering on a more general level. Thank you.
I would like to add something to the first question regarding public policy. We began this, you began this by mentioning Marx, and then we had Gramsci thrown in. And now in the book is a historical materialist policy analysis. Unfortunately, Uli Brandt isn't here with us, but is it possible to tell us what something about a historical materialist policy analysis, which definitely connects political economy with policy studies?
Okay, maybe
Joscha.
I start. So I don't know whether this is a misunderstanding, but what the theories I showed were, of course, theories of IPE. But many of these theories are applied to public policy. So these are our approaches to public policy. What I could have done is to write behind that Gramscian public policy analysis, neo-Marxian public policy analysis, liberal public policy. I didn't do that, yeah. But so therefore I said there is political economy, there's public policy, but many of these approaches are then linked to that. So what you could easily, or what I meant with that is actually, this is the combination we do. I just didn't mention public policy, yeah. So that's first. And I think so because you kind of pressured, what do they have in common? Yeah, I would say what I said in the presentation. First is struggles everywhere, between and among very different groups. Yeah, this implies second that power relations are everywhere. Yeah, and very different ones. So not only very Weberian, but Foucauldian, whatever. Structural notions of power. Then third, that these overall structure then is a hierarchical structured field, yeah, unevenly structured field, yeah. That's of course also for global relations, yeah. To be honest, to this kind of complexity, we don't start with a simple model by deducting then our approach, but we start with complexity, yeah. So we introduce complexity, and then, of course, that's science, and we have to reduce complexity. But we try to be still very close to our empirical findings, and that's the difference, I would say, to most of what is happening in economics, yeah, or the rational choice, public choice, yeah, where there's a reduction from the very beginning, yeah. And this, I think, then the difference that we introduce these complexity and then reduce it, of course, and being very open to what is actually our focus, our ontologies, our empirical approach to that. Yeah.
Nikolai had a second question. I sort of
Yeah.
came off there unintentionally.
Well,
About
I can
why you did
perhaps,
the book.
yeah, perhaps I can address that question. But first, concerning the overview of public policy theories, I think one can consult Frank Fischer's books, his handbooks there, that are very insightful. Our motivation was the feeling that there is this kind of debate of what is actually political economy, and that in the field of economics, there is a claim that they do political economy. And we wanted to show that there is also a different type of political economy with a long history behind it, and with very many different types of approaches. And that was, I think, a key motivation for us. And as Anna has already pointed out, then also bringing in more voices from different places there, and not just leaving political economy to the Anglosphere there, because that's the strongest in the field of political economy. The British and American, and to a certain extent Scandinavian universities, but there is a long tradition also, especially in Latin America, but not exclusively in Latin America, on international but also national political economy and their own theoretical approaches to it. Now to Frank's question concerning historical materialist policy analysis, I think that starts out with being a bit critical of Bob Jessop, cultural political economy. They want to stress that there is also something beyond discourse there, and want to highlight, yes, discourse plays a role, but interests also play a role. And they are a little bit closer to believing that there is a clear-cut objectivity there, and are a little bit irritated by the relativism of cultural political economy there. It is not necessarily what perhaps Joscha and I'm not quite sure about Anna, but she can say something to it, use as an approach. But parts of it, we definitely think it's very interesting there. And we can really recommend this chapter. But it does not necessarily mean that we are in complete agreement, because interests are usually also somehow constructed there. They can also not so easily be deducted from structural constraints, but need to be also put into relation to specific discourses there.
I would just say that regarding the question of connecting political economy to public policy studies, the connection is quite correct if one views political economy as policy analysis. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're doing a political economic policy analysis.
But not only, Frank, I think that we can use political economy for policy evaluation, for policy transfer, for all of these aspects of public policies. I'm dealing, for instance, with evaluation of environmental assessment studies. So if you don't come from a bottom-up perspective, if you don't have sensitivity to the local communities, to local workers, to culture, language, the way they work, you cannot access and really evaluate whether your environmental access study is really reaching those communities which will be affected by, say, a big infrastructure project or roads, dam, port, etc. So I think that critical political economy can and should be very useful for not only formulating public policies, but evaluating and evaluating also public policies transfer. When you talk about South-South relation, there's a lot of already known studies and discussions around public policy transfer.
Thomas raised his hand.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to lower it. Anna, a little while ago, said that the rise of sort of right-wing populism and in some ways right-wing extremism too has placed a certain burden on the public choice, rational choice approach to this individualistic perspective to explain this phenomenon. Now, I looked at the book, and you don't seem to have a dedicated chapter on a political or critical political economy approach to explaining this rise of right-wing populism, which quite obviously affects public policy when people like Donald Trump win office and then execute these kinds of policies. But what would you say? What's the critical political economy contribution to explaining this rise of right-wing populism pretty much across the board in Europe and North America and now even Latin America?
And
Yeah.
Asia, I would say.
Sorry. The consequences of now over 2 decades of neoliberalism over workers, work conditions, laws protecting workers, the way that neoliberalism has affected the whole condition of life and access to public services, all of these economic issues have over time shaping people's mentality. They have, stopped to believe in traditional actors such as labor unions, socialist, political parties. Oops, sorry, my cat is here. How, to understand those political choices according to social classes, how to understand those political choices according to gender relations and gender issues. So I think that, the critical political economy has a lot to say, not alone, of course, but has a lot to say on how people really changed their choices over politics and political parties and elections because of the consequences of this medium and long-term effects of neoliberalism. So there are many studies. I don't think that any of them is really complete in all of these aspects, but many of them are touching these aspects very strongly. I did myself a book chapter for Socialist Register, actually presented in Kassel 2 years ago, on how we were conditioned by what we say private hegemonic apparatuses such as foundations, associations, in order to think individually towards life. How are we disciplined to work and disciplined to this mentality of having to have no law, no social coverage, anything, just to be for ourselves and in ourselves, to struggle for having a good position in society. How this has all influenced in Latin America the moves towards the far right, and we can of course compare this to North America a lot. There's a lot of already comparison between Bolsonaro and Trump. So I think all of this puts some pressure, in all of the political scientists on the one hand, but also on the economists on the other hand, to understand such phenomenon as the rise of the far right. So this was what I was trying to say.
But to follow on Thomas's question, it's often argued that it's less political economy than cultural and identity politics that's basic to the populist movement. And I'm wondering if, coming back to Bob Jessup, if his cultural political economy has anything special to say about that? I
This
mean,
is
well,
exactly our response. Our response is to say this is not only cultural, it's not only identity politics. It has to do with economics too, and not only identity. I think this is our take. This is our contribution. Because if we leave it out only to cultural issues, to religious issues even, or to identity politics, we're missing a big part of the foundations of this whole move, which is precarization, which is flexibilization, which is the loss of any perspective of having something to hold on in social life and social economics. This is also what Polanyi said in the 1940s. This is the counter movement of society really having to deal with this whole loss of all the social and public policies that it had before. So we have to add, I think that the whole cultural discussion is very important. Otherwise, we are too much materialist in that. It's very important to bring in cultural studies, and this Bob Jessup methodology is really interesting. But what we do is to say it's not alone the only explanation.
Maybe I would add to that, going back to Ernesto Laclau, who studied a lot on populism, actually, in saying that, well, first, there is a unsatisfaction, there are demands, yeah? There is a very, very frustrated people for several reasons, and I completely in line with Anna's analysis, saying that, I mean, we have austerity policies now for 40 years, yeah? And then there was, after the Soviet Union broke down, so there was a lot of changes, yeah? But now it's clear that the bottom of many societies are losing out, yeah? And they're super frustrated. So there are the demands for changing something, but it's not changing because politics very much sticks to these austerity and neoliberal policies. And then identity politics comes in, yeah? And identity politics, you need identity politics in order then to construct an identity. In Germany, it's the AfD, for example, yeah? Or all the other populism actually. Construction identity where many people think, okay, now I vote for them, now I join them because they are kind of represent my demands, yeah? And we have a strong antagonism coming now from the right wing. So well, we don't have to discuss what is first, yeah? And here I'm maybe more Marxist than I'm normally arguing here, saying there's a kind, but that the economic conditions, of course, are a strong reason for people being frustrated, yeah? Is no big clue, actually. But of course, that's not enough. You need kind of identity politics then to get these people in order to vote for you, in order to join you. And this is happening all over the world currently. This is, of course, a huge problem. I completely agree with that.
Interesting. Further questions?
Thomas, raising hand.
Thomas. Thomas?
We could not hear you, Thomas.
You muted.
There. Sorry. Thanks. I wanted to follow up with, I mean, I understand completely sort of the whole point about economic grievances. That's not surprising. But of course, a result of economic grievances and a response to neoliberalism and austerity and all of that could very well also be a left-wing response, like you know, electing parties and politicians from the left, and but that's not happening. And if I'm looking for a political economy answer, then I wonder whether this logical process is enough to say, you know, there's economic grievance and there's a demand for different policies, and then parties are elected that offer identity as a response. Because when you look at, I mean, wouldn't political economists have to look at the economic policies on offer from these right-wing populists that are being elected. What are they offering as a response to these grievances? That's the first thing. If it's an economic demand, but the answer is identity politics, that sort of doesn't quite satisfy me as an answer. And then the second part of this is if we were looking at this political development with a Gramscian perspective, then you'd also need kind of a material basis for this right-wing populist rise. And what's that? Is that are there suddenly so many economic actors that want a more isolationist, nationalist, protectionist economy? Are we suddenly seeing an economic basis for a true anti-globalization movement? I mean, that's basically what this would be. If they would all win, it would be a world full of more closed borders and more protectionism and so on and so forth. Who are the economic actors behind that? Who is pushing that? Is there someone pushing that? That's kind of like what I was hoping for as an answer in terms of political economy, rather than being thrown back to identity politics.
I know, I agree with you. What strikes me a lot is to read, for instance, have you taken a look on the whole Financial Times coverage of Javier Milei in Argentina? It's amazing. They're supporting Milei all the way through. Like the forces behind those far rights are real liberal forces. What we see is mostly a kind of convergence of neoliberals and far right leaders. We're not seeing the opposite. I don't quite see that we are going through an anti-globalization movement. We're doing their kind of globalization, sorry, which is really for capitalist major groups and against poor people and workers. And the interesting thing is how to grasp is how people were convinced throughout these decades of neoliberalism and austerity that it is their own responsibility. It's their own responsibility over their lives. They have to take care about themselves, and that's it. And if they lose everything, they don't have any social policies to support them. This is not to be expected anymore. You don't expect labor laws to protect you anymore. You don't expect a full labor contract anymore. So the expectations that are in people's minds is not that the state has to be big and to protect them again, but on the opposite, that they have to be strong enough to fight and to compete in market. And this is what is really behind the radical liberal forces that are together, interestingly, with the far right. So I see that critical political economy, even though does not have the full answer, but it has an important answer to give. And to try to disclose a little bit what is behind this identity politics that is so upfront. It's not because I don't like any other genders than the bio genders. It's not only this, right? It is really, how do I understand myself in the market, in politics, and how do I survive in this wild competition that I'm being thrown into. And I think that, we have a big task in front of us when we see, big, strong liberal forces. And I would just mention the Financial Times as an example, supporting and trying to, to see the success of far-right governance, such as the one in Argentina today.
Yes, I think, Thomas, you are right. One needs to also look at specific social forces that are driving it, and not just the identity politics. When we But that is probably different from country to country. So in the US, I would say that the financial crisis of 2008 was a major point where the financial establishment was questioned, and some of them then also supported the Tea Party and the rise of the right wing, or Bannon's ideas and so on were supported by some of the very rich people. Or when we now look at Musk and so on. So there was then the fear that there would be more of a left-wing pressure to tax the rich more and to regulate them more and so on. And so some of the rich then were much in support of that. In Brazil, probably also, as once under Dilma, the economy no longer was growing, then the idea was perhaps we should squeeze workers more in order to keep up our profit rates there. And coming to the issue of what does the right offer, I think they do offer the idea that the ones that are there and who seem to be the dominant force in society in terms of numbers, that their position can be secured or improved by putting pressure on more marginal groups, especially on immigrants there. So the deal is in a way saying, you don't have to fight the rich, which is always very difficult. It is easier to kick the poor and the marginalized there. And I think that's kind of the economic program that they are offering. And that, to a certain extent, to some people also make quite a lot of sense, because it is much more difficult to fight the rich than to kick the poor.
But maybe a little add to defend Bob Jessop and Nailing Sun. They wouldn't say that there's just some identity politics out there without any actors. Of course, they also do. And this kind of political economy, cultural economy also does actor analysis. Of course, there is no discourse without actors supporting and strategically pushing forward some discourses. So it's not exclusively either identity politics or actors. Of course, you have to, but you have to understand in order to then, and this is a very important question, and it's definitely specific to each country, why the right wings are winning these discourses and winning the hearts of many people, and not left-wing politics. Yeah? Although in Latin America, there has been always a strong, let's say, competition from left-wing governments as well, in difference, I would say, to Europe, not entirely, but at least to Germany. So I think, but it's not my research. So just jumping on what we're doing in this book is saying we need exactly this complexity in order to understand issues. Yeah, and this right-wing dominance now is definitely a very important issue.
Okay,
I
we could
think
take.
we try to limit the session within
Right.
1 hour and a half, right? Yeah.
If we have another question, we can take it. But then we think come to an end. Doesn't seem to be a further question. So I would say thank you to Christoph, Anna, and Joscha. This is very interesting, a very interesting discussion, an important discussion. We make these videos available so you can see them, you can distribute them. That is, in fact, our idea. And Piyapong has explained where you find them. You might want to do that again, Piyapong. But with that, I would say thank you.